So I'm here to talk about my discipline, composition and writing studies, and think about composition and writing studies in the context of an education here at Georgia Tech. So I'm going to open with a riddle, and it is, what do a shirt and an academic discipline have in common? They are things that people are in. Sorry, I'm going to have to switch with my pages here. There are right and not right ways to be in them. And those ways are not always made explicit to learners and wearers. I mean, when was the last time somebody told you how to put on a shirt? But in the same way, when was the last time somebody told you what it meant to be a chemist, or a biologist, or an ecologist, or a historian? That's because as the more expert people are, the more it's expected that people will know how to be in both. And if they don't, things can get quite complicated. And yes, the stakes are a little higher in higher education. So, there are easier t-shirts, like this one. It's not so hard to put on a t-shirt, at least if you're an able-bodied person, though it may be hard for someone built differently. And then there are shirts that are just, well, more difficult, like this shirt. And then there are disciplines. They're even more difficult. Once we're in one, it seems logical and natural, like a shirt. But sometimes we forget just how hard it can be to get in there, like the shirt that Claire Danes was wearing from the Met Gala, and we'll come back to that. We have to know the right questions to ask, the right kinds of evidence or data to collect, and how to interpret it in the right ways. And you might be wondering, why are these things highlighted? The highlighting points to words that indicate that these definitions of rightness are not objective or natural. They're not rules, they're norms. And they're established and reinforced by communities of people who have defined and continue to define rules for rightness over time. And I'm going to wait for that slide to advance. Yes, thank you. So in a shirt, it's a little like a discipline because there are appropriate ways to be in both. But these ways aren't objective or set in stone. Instead, they're learned over time, and they aren't always made explicit. For our college learners, being in a shirt might be lower stakes, though if you're at the Met Gala, again, the shirt can be pretty high. And you might be wondering, what does this have to do with writing studies and composition, my discipline? Well, just this, I say. Rightness, or appropriateness, is often cultivated, represented, and assessed through language. That's written, oral, visual, electronic, or nonverbal language, especially in universities. This classic marked up paper on the slide, what I think of as a written bloodletting, is an example of how rightness is sometimes assessed, and it illustrates the point. Different disciplines have different ideas of what makes something right. And this is rooted in the disciplinary training of faculty who control the terms of rightness. This is true even as we aspire to interdisciplinarity because people are trained, assessed, and tenured in disciplines or interdisciplines. And one of the first places that discipline-based ideas of rightness comes up is in writing. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. This is an illustration from an introduction to a book that I'm working on right now with my colleague Chris Gallagher. I'm going to point you to a few features. First, oh my God, directly addressing readers. How can that happen? Well, in my discipline, that happens. Here's a very informal signal phrase. Here's Dewey writing about blah, blah, blah. And look, it's got this really long quote from John Dewey, and you might think like, oh, that is so jargony. There's so many words. And look at the last sentence, it's really long. Why is there a semicolon that makes the sentence even longer and not a period? Now, we're going to contrast that with this text. This is from an article published in a STEM teaching journal. It includes an explanation of modeling. It's got sequential citations. If you're in my discipline, you're like, what's up with these sequential citations? It's got these mathematical figures. If you're me, I'm like, oof, mathematical figures. And it's got statistics. Oof. I hope you get the point. There are disciplinary differences. These are two very different disciplines, and the right kind of writing is different in each of them. There's no one good kind of writing, no right kind of writing that all other kinds of writing grow from. What's defined as good writing reflects and the values of the people doing the communities doing the defining. When people don't demonstrate rightness, it's not because they can't write. It might be because they aren't familiar with the rules. They haven't learned them or they haven't practiced with them. It might be because the rules have been stacked against them from the beginning, as their language was defined by others as somehow, quote unquote, wrong. It might mean, too, that they've made a choice. They don't want to demonstrate participation in these disciplines because it violates something they believe in. And this is why writing studies and composition matter. As study of and practice with composed knowledge, let's call it writing plus, we look at how writing is learned, practiced, taught, and assessed in contexts. Writing studies helps to create a citizenry that can critically engage with the study of and practice with production of writing. We do this by asking and working with learners to ask some critical questions about what I think of as the foundations of things. First, we ask, how is composed knowledge made in this place? How is it built? For instance, in this discipline or interdiscipline. I should note here that when I refer to learners, I'm including faculty and students in this term. These days, most of the teaching I do is with faculty. But we also could ask, what does it look like in a workplace? What about in this community site or community location? We also could look at this in a political campaign, news site, or social media platform. That's especially timely right now. Asking questions about how Writing Plus is made, whether in a discipline or anywhere else, enables learners to understand what people expect writing to be in that place. But that's only the start. In writing studies, we help people ask these questions via two key terms, conventions and genres. Conventions are the formal and informal rules associated with participation in genres. They're the things that people like to make sure are, quote unquote, right. Genres are the types of writing whose boundaries, which include conventions, are enacted and reinforced by users over time with the intention of reifying practices and values. Put differently, if we are faculty members and we assign a particular genre, we are saying, this kind of writing is important to my discipline because it does this kind of thing that's valued in my discipline. To be correct, it needs to look like this thing, and it looks like this thing by employing these conventions. For instance, never use I, or always use I, or make sure your analysis is clear early in the writing, or never put your analysis early in the writing. Make sure that it's implied at the end because you don't want to lead the writer rigidly too much through a text. Or use APA style, which means synthesize your references as much as possible. Rarely use extended quotes, and make sure the citations are date and then page number, but that the reader can see the author. Or use MLA style, which means the analysis prior to and after the selection. Make sure the citations are author, page, and include the date in the works cited list, and so on. These conventions, as you can clearly see, are not the same. Sometimes, in fact, they're contradictory. And that is why studying how writing is made is so important. Then, in writing studies, we ask and work with students to study who and why. Who's doing the building and making of conventions and genres? And what are their interests? So rewind a minute to APA versus MLA. Why does APA want syntheses, but not long quotes, with citations that have dates and pages? Why does MLA want longer selections, not syntheses, with citations that nod to the author? Because of what's valued in the disciplines, which is to say by the people in the disciplines who built the citation systems. APA values currency, the date kind of currency. It's a scientific discipline, and science is about testing hypotheses. The more recent the test, the more recently the hypothesis has been tested and retested. With sources, people want to know, when is this from? And the more people have thought about that thing, the better. In MLA, the people who created the citation system were concerned initially with authorial intent. Who wrote the thing? What were their words? And what is the person doing with the words? That's what matters. We know then it's important to ask, who's defining what's right and not right? What are their values, their ideologies, their motives? Sometimes these are aligned with those being invited or required to manifest rightness by using genres and conventions defined as appropriate in the context. But sometimes it's not. And what happens then? Whose ideas are included in those ideas of rightness and whose are excluded? We live in a time where thinking about whose ideas are allowed and not allowed carries very, very important implications for learners, instructors, and for our democracy. When we study writing and teach students to study writing, we invite a discussion about the implication of whose ideas are allowed to be right, whose ideas are not allowed to be right, and what that might mean. In writing studies, we also emphasize practice. It's not practice with rote repetition, but with conscious choices. We ask and we work with learners to ask, what do I already know about the genres I'm being asked to use that are typified in this context? Where have I done it before? Importantly, we teach and study how to learn what readers and writers need to know if they don't know things about how to participate in genres. And we study and work with learners to consider what and whose values and ideologies are being reinforced when I participate here. This is important as people make choices about participating in genres. It's also important as we faculty design courses where we ask students to compose writing or writing plus in all the many forms we require, even when those forms are something like a multiple choice exam. Whenever we produce composed knowledge or writing plus, we are participating in ideologies where the writing is embedded. Circling back to what writing studies and composition is as a discipline then, it's that study and practice of how writing is learned, practiced, taught, and assessed in a variety of contexts. And as I said, it matters a lot. Now you might ask, for whom? Or you might ask, who does it matter for? And I will ask you, does one of these ways of asking this question, the same question, make you nuts? And if it does, why does it make you nuts? So the answer to my question is, it matters for learners. And as I've said, we are all learners. Writing and language are personal and political. And that's why one way or another way of asking a straightforward question like the one I just shared might make you nuts. I'm guessing we all understood what I was asking in both ways of asking that question. But if one bugged you, it might have been because you have been socialized into particular views about writing and language. And those views affect how you perceive language and the people who are using language. But I'm here as a writing expert to tell you, one way is not better than another. It's just that we've been socialized to believe that some ways are better than other ways. When we ask writers to produce good writing, to do things in the ways that we say are better, we're asking them to participate in cultures and values that say that these ways, and not these other ways, are better ways, just like the phrasing of this question. As teachers, and yes, we are also all teachers, we can work with this idea about writing as a signal of disciplinary participation and help learners practice with writing in our discipline by remembering writing is personal, political, and a sign of disciplinary participation. For writers to be successful, experts help them learn how to learn and practice with conventions of writing in the discipline. This involves, if the slide clicker works, how writing happens, how to draw on prior knowledge, and how to practice with genres and their conventions, as well as how to make conscious choices about when, whether, and why to do so. As faculty, we can do this by asking some questions. How is knowledge made here? What are threshold concepts, particularly deeply rooted concepts from which all of our disciplines proceed, that bound ideas of questions, methods, data, and analysis? What are typified genres and conventions here? Whose ideas are included or not included in these genres? And how can I make ideas about writing more expansive so that I can make room for ideas that have been historically excluded? So, back to my riddle. Writing is kind of like a shirt. Putting one on can be complicated, and it's learned through practice, just like a discipline. Once we understand how to put on a shirt, we perpetuate the idea of shirtness, how it works, what it does. But we don't often think about how the shirt is made or try to change the shirt, at least not very often. At the same time, knowing how the shirt is made is complicated. It's something experts know and novices don't. When we think about it, we can make conscious choices about what makes it what it is. We can challenge or even change the idea of a shirt. As we rethink disciplines and the future of higher education, we are challenged to do this every day. And we think about the questions that composition and writing studies can allow us to consider. In the same way that basic science remains a necessity, those of us in writing studies invite a focus on the foundation of things, of majors, disciplines, and institutional structures. We ask and we invite learners with whom we work to ask, how is this thing made and why? Whose interests are included, excluded, and why? How can we remodel and redesign? These questions are essential for any institution, any faculty member, any student to ask. And that is why composition and writing studies matter. It's how learners learn to study and practice with composed knowledge, make conscious decisions about how, when, whether, and why to participate. So what could be more important? Thank you.
Please join us in welcoming our respondent, Kelly Ritter, Chair and Professor in the School of Literature, Media, and Communication. Let's welcome Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I feel like I'm in Vegas, sort of, with that disembodied voice of Will Jimerson behind me. Thank you all for being here. Good morning. As Will said, I'm the chair of the School of Literature, Media, and Communication. Oh, look, there's my face. Hold on. I wanted to go back. This clicker is a little bit fun. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what Dr. Adler-Kassner had to say. I'm in the same field as she is. I'm also in writing studies. And I want to talk about it through the lens of the School of LMC. As you probably know, schools here, maybe called departments other places, are often containing more than one discipline. So the idea of disciplinarity is one thing that I want to engage a little bit in relation to LMC. So we are, as you can tell from our name, a place that holds multitudes. So LMC contains rhetoric and writing studies, which includes technical writing, writing pedagogy, historiographies of writing, the latter of which is what I do primarily. Literary and cultural studies, so American, Brit-Lit, World-Lit, also Black media studies, which is film and literature and cultural studies. Creative writing, poetry writing, screenwriting, fiction writing. Film and television studies, film theory and history, video production, post-production, industry studies. And digital media, which is this and other things too. I'm not a digital media person, so I joke with my DM faculty like, I kind of get what you do, but keep helping me figure it out. So AR, VR, games, HCI, AI, UX, interactive narrative, social media, media-based learning, just to name a few. And then media arts, yet another category, which I'm putting here to include theater and performance studies, graphic design and visual arts, and multimodal production. So you can see that we have lots of disciplines in our school, including the one that I belong to primarily. So some of you may have heard the idea of a big tent, right? That's a concept. So what defines the Big Tent approach? LMC being the very definition, I would say, of a Big Tent school. So 3 things, I think: having a spectrum of beliefs and dialogue under one umbrella, an inclusive structure that allows for multiple beliefs to coexist in one shared space, and then a space that has the capacity to welcome additional perspectives, and in doing so, alter its own internal composition. So does that mean that being a big tent means that you're interdisciplinary? Well, kinda. So the 2 terms that we don't often always, I guess, hear in connection with each other is interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity. And a very wise biologist once told me, Kelly, most people are multidisciplinary. It's very difficult to be interdisciplinary in actuality. So interdisciplinary is defined by, to say, reliance on shared knowledge if you're collaborating across disciplines. Also, the result of combining 2 or more fields of academic study in equal measure. So I use historical methods in my research. I would not say that I'm a bona fide historian per se, because that's not how I was trained. But I do use those methods, and I also use ethnographic methods and some other things. I'm not sure that I'm completely interdisciplinary because I don't have the expertise as deep as a historian or a ethnographer separately. Multidisciplinary, in contrast, consists of people working side by side in parallel on a common research question, and scholars who bring multiple disciplinary perspectives equally to bear on a problem or an experiment or a research study, but not necessarily for the purposes of blurring the boundaries. And so I think that's more the way that I work, but we're both. So in talking a little bit about LMC, which is part of what I want to do with you today, I think we're both interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, and we do use writing and composition and the composing of different kinds of texts across our school's work. So we work side by side to solve common problems, including one of the ones we're talking about today, how the humanities can inform, improve, and advance principles critical to STEM. We also work together to combine our knowledge across disciplines to create research-based, peer-reviewed, textual, visual, tactile examples of knowledge sharing and meaning making. And we draw upon, and in some cases have training in disciplines neither explicitly contained in our school name nor in our college name to augment what we know. So we have faculty who have doctorates in computer science, engineering, architecture, visual arts, history, psychology, philosophy, and I see my colleague Yanni out there who's an architect. So we definitely have things that are not hailed in our name, and so we already have faculty coming from outside of the disciplines listed in our name to inform the disciplines that are in our name, which again, going back to Dr. Adler-Kassner's questions, makes it even more complex to think about rightness, correctness, genres, conventions, and so on. So Dr. Adler-Kassner's key questions, I just wanted to highlight again. Who's doing the building, right? What are their values, ideologies, and motives? Who are excluded and who are included? How is composing done in the discipline, workplace, community, and then the public context? And I see other colleagues out there, Allegra Smith, who does quite a bit with the sort of public and social media and circulation and content creation. How do we define rightness or correctness across writers, audiences, and context? And so here's some responses from an LMC perspective. ChatGPT, as far as I know, does not have belief systems or values, but somebody might correct me at the break, so let me know. My brother-in-law just retired from Microsoft, and he's very, very invested in ChatGPT, and I'm like, but John, there's context and there's values, and it's not present. So that's something we think about. Whereas writers and other types of makers in our school do, of course, bring those values, right? People in rhetoric like to say rhetoric is never neutral. You always bring your position to everything that you do. The outfit I chose today, to go back to the shirt example, has a rhetoric of its own because I chose this and not something else. So we always bring values to our situation. We trouble disciplinary rightness and correctness by key things. Knowledge making crosses boundaries that are often not only new to students, but changing rapidly with many rules. And the humanities itself is a field, if you say to a high school student, what are the humanities? They're like, so even just defining the broad areas that cover multiple disciplines and what it means to be right in those is complicated in itself. What's correct, as Linda said, to one audience is unacceptable to another, the infamous I example. And what we believe across context, audience, and purposes is complex when we cross disciplines and create new knowledge. And I don't think there's a uniform definition of good writing across the many disciplines represented in LMC. I think that an article by one of my digital media colleagues would probably read very differently than an article that I might write, or an article that one of my literary studies colleagues would write. We just care about different things, and we cite them and hail them in different ways. So, how we compose together. So all of us in LMC are influencing and are influenced by communities and contexts outside of our disciplines. I think that's something we could probably agree on. So thus, as Linda points out, there's no composing in the broadest sense without the recognition of multiple contexts and also difficult constructions thereof. I'm trying to do it behind my back. We who do the building must always keep in mind the architecture of our creations and how inclusive or exclusive they are. And that, of course, goes to teaching as well. Students may have a sense in their mind of what the text actually said. We have a mind of what the text actually said. I have a different way of explaining it than they would. So how can we avail each other of the ways that we're reading and writing into something so that we're making meaning out of it? And composing in all of its forms is a human endeavor. So these are my adjectives: messy, recursive, dialectical, beautiful, mysterious, that also should be afforded humanizing considerations across disciplines, including in the school that I'm in. So I hope this works. This is on our website, and I thought it would be interesting for you all to see how our students in LMC actually talk about why they're an LMC. And I gather some of them maybe in the audience. I'm sorry. Okay. But I mean, I'm not, because you're wonderful. Okay. So actually, there was a part of this video prior to these folks that actually talked about LMC more specifically, and so unfortunately it didn't queue up quite that way, but talking about how people can choose different threads in our major and not have to stick to a prescribed sequence of courses, how students can get involved in making as well as writing, as well as literary text and other things. So there were a couple there that I unfortunately didn't quite queue up that way, but you can go to our LMC website and you can go to our YouTube channel that's called YLMC, and you can see all these videos, and I encourage you to do so because our students are fantastic. They're wonderful spokespeople for what we do in this school and why the liberal arts are important. And so I wanted to close with them and again thank Dr. Adler-Kassner for her talk. Thank you so much.